Hey everyone, I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying upload. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more of the content you love. I never thought I'd be in this situation. It all started when I broke up with my ex, Tim. We'd been together for 2 years, but things had gotten really intense. He was always checking my phone, questioning where I'd been, and getting upset if I spent time with friends. I knew I had to end it. At first, everything seemed fine. Tim didn't make a big scene when I ended things. He just nodded and left. I felt relieved, thinking I could finally move on with my life. But that relief didn't last long. A few days after the breakup, I tried to log into my bank account to pay some bills. My password didn't work. I figured I must have forgotten it, so I tried to reset it. But the security questions were all wrong. I called the bank, and they told me I'd changed all my information recently, but I hadn't. That's when I started to panic. I tried logging into my email, my social media accounts, even my work profile. Nothing worked. It was like I'd been locked out of my entire digital life. I went to the bank in person, hoping to sort things out. But when I got there, they told me my account had been drained. All my savings were gone. I felt sick to my stomach. As I was leaving the bank, my phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had posted on my social media accounts, sharing embarrassing photos and making wild claims about me. Friends were commenting, asking what was going on. I couldn't even respond to explain. That's when I realized what was happening. Tim had stolen my identity. He'd somehow gotten access to all my accounts and was using them to control my life. I felt violated and scared. I went to the police, but they weren't much help. They said it was hard to prove it was Tim and that these cases were complicated. They took a report, but I could tell they weren't going to do much. Over the next few days, things got worse. My credit cards were maxed out. My work email was flooded with inappropriate messages sent to my colleague. My reputation was being destroyed, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I tried to contact Tim, but he'd disappeared. His phone was disconnected, and he'd moved out of his apartment. It was like he'd vanished, leaving only the digital version of himself that was ruining my life. I started digging, trying to figure out how Tim had pulled this off. I talked to mutual friends, piecing together information. It turned out Tim had been planning this for months. He'd been collecting my personal information, setting up fake accounts, and even creating false records. One friend told me Tim had asked her to take photos of me at a party months ago, claiming it was for a surprise. Now I realized those photos were being used to create fake IDs and documents in my name. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Every day brought new horrors. I'd get calls from creditors about accounts I never opened. I'd see posts on my social media that I never made. My boss called me in, concerned about my erratic behavior online. I knew I had to fight back. I started by changing all the passwords I could still access. I set up new email accounts and contacted everyone I knew, explaining the situation. I spent hours on the phone with banks and credit card companies trying to prove I was the real me. It was exhausting and frustrating. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back. Tim always seemed to be 1 step ahead, locking me out of accounts as soon as I regained access. I started keeping a detailed log of everything that happened. Every strange charge, every fake post, every account that was compromised. I gathered as much evidence as I could, hoping it would help me prove what was happening. I also started looking into Tim's past. I talked to his ex-girlfriends, his old roommates, anyone who might have information. I discovered he'd done similar things before, though never on this scale. It was a pattern of controlling behavior that had escalated over time. As I dug deeper, I uncovered something even more disturbing. Tim had been setting me up for months, creating situations that could be used to frame me for crimes. There were records of me making purchases in stores I'd never visited, security camera footage that had been doctored to show me in places I'd never been. I realized I wasn't just fighting to regain control of my digital life. I was fighting to stay out of jail. The evidence Tim had fabricated could easily be used against me if anyone started investigating. I felt overwhelmed and alone. My friends were supportive, but they couldn't really understand what I was going through. My family was worried, but they lived far away and couldn't do much to help. But I knew I couldn't give up. This was my life, and I had to fight for it. I started reaching out to identity theft experts and lawyers. I learned about the steps I needed to take to reclaim my identity and clear my name. It was a slow process, full of setbacks and frustrations. There were days when I wanted to give up, to just disappear and start over somewhere new. But I knew that wasn't the answer. I had to face this head on. Slowly, things started to turn around. I managed to regain control of some of my accounts. I filed reports with every agency I could think of, documenting the identity theft. I worked with my bank to secure my finances and dispute the fraudulent charges. The breakthrough came when one of Tim's old roommates came forward with evidence. He had texts and emails from Tim discussing his plans to teach me a lesson after the breakup. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to get the police to take my case seriously. With the police finally investigating, things started moving faster. They tracked down Tim and arrested him. It turned out he'd been hiding out at a friend's cabin, continuing his digital attack on my life. Even after Tim's arrest, the process of reclaiming my life wasn't easy. It took months to sort out all the false information and fix my credit. I had to explain the situation to countless people, from potential employers to new friends, but gradually things got better. I regained control of my accounts. My reputation started to recover. I learned to be more careful with my personal information and to value my privacy in ways I never had before. Looking back, I can hardly believe everything that happened. It feels like a bad dream, but it taught me a lot about resilience and the importance of fighting for yourself. I'm stronger now, and I know I can handle whatever life throws at me, but I also know the value of trust and how careful we need to be with the people we let into our lives. It all started after Jake and I split up. At first I thought he'd take it okay, but I was so wrong. The messages began trickling in, just normal stuff at first, asking how I was doing, if we could talk. I ignored them, thinking he'd get the hint, but he didn't. The messages got weirder, more cryptic. He'd send quotes from songs we used to listen to or reference inside jokes from our relationship. It creeped me out, so I blocked him on everything: social media, my phone, email. I thought that would be the end of it. Nope. Somehow, he kept finding ways to contact me. Anonymous accounts would pop up with similar messages. I'd get texts from unknown numbers. Once I even got a letter in my mailbox with no return address. I knew it was him. I tried to move on with my life, but it was hard. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. My friends told me I was being paranoid, that Jake would give up eventually. I wanted to believe them, but something in my gut said otherwise. Then things got really weird. I'd come home and swear things had been moved around. Not big things, just small stuff, a book on a different shelf, a mug in the wrong cabinet. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. One night I came home late from work. As I walked up to my front door, I noticed something off. The door was slightly open, just a crack. My heart started racing. I knew I'd locked it that morning. I always double-checked. I stood there for a minute debating what to do. Should I call the police, go to a neighbor's? But what if I was overreacting and had just forgotten to lock up? I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Everything looked normal at first glance. I did a quick walkthrough of the apartment, checking each room. Nothing seemed out of place or missing. I started to relax, thinking maybe the wind had blown the door open or something. That's when I heard it, a soft thump from above me. I froze, my blood running cold. There was someone in my attic. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed a kitchen knife and climbed the pull-down ladder to the attic. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the knife. As I poked my head up into the dusty space, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. And there he was, Jake, sitting cross-legged on an old sleeping bag, surrounded by empty food wrappers and water bottles. He looked terrible, unwashed, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. But the worst part was the look on his face. It was a mix of desperation and triumph, like he'd finally won some twisted game. I couldn't believe it. He'd been living in my attic. For how long? Days? Weeks? The realization made me sick to my stomach. I scrambled back down the ladder, my mind racing. I had to get out of there. But as I turned to run, Jake appeared at the bottom of the ladder. He started rambling about how we were meant to be together, how he'd been watching over me, protecting me. I knew I had to stay calm. I edged towards the front door, trying to keep Jake talking. He followed, still going on about our relationship. I could see the crazed look in his eyes growing stronger. Just as I reached for the doorknob, Jake lunged at me. We struggled, and I managed to break free. I ran out into the hallway screaming for help. Jake chased after me, but my neighbors heard the commotion and came out. Someone called the police. The next few hours were a blur. Police statements, Jake being taken away in handcuffs, crime scene texts combing through my apartment. I couldn't stop shaking. I found out later that Jake had been living in my attic for almost a month. He'd made a copy of my key when we were still together and had been sneaking in and out when I was at work. The thought of him watching me, being in my space without me knowing, made my skin crawl. The aftermath was tough. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. Too many bad memories. I moved in with a friend while I looked for a new place. I went to therapy, trying to process what had happened. It took a long time before I felt safe again. Looking back, I can see the red flags I missed. Jake had always been possessive, but I'd brushed it off as him being romantic. I learned the hard way that love shouldn't feel suffocating or scary. It's been a few years now, and I'm doing better. I still have moments where I get paranoid, thinking I hear something in the attic or feeling like I'm being watched. But I'm working through it. I'm more cautious now, but I'm not letting fear rule my life. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore those little warning signs. And remember, real love doesn't try to control or scare you. It should make you feel safe and respected. I hope sharing my experience helps someone else recognize the signs of an unhealthy relationship before it escalates. No one should have to go through what I did. Stay safe out there, and don't be afraid to reach out for help if you need it. I never thought I'd be in this mess. It all started when Sarah and I broke up a few months ago. We'd been together for 2 years and things had been good for a while. But eventually, we just grew apart. I thought the split was mutual and amicable. Boy, was I wrong. At first, everything seemed normal, but we went our separate ways, and I started to move on with my life. I even met someone new, Emily, who I really clicked with. Things were looking up. Then came the first email. It was from Sarah, and it contained a video clip. My heart sank as I watched it. It was an intimate moment between us that I didn't even know had been recorded. The message was clear: come back to me or this goes public. I was shocked and angry. I couldn't believe Sarah would do this. I told her to leave me alone and that I wouldn't give in to blackmail. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, my mom called me, sounding upset. She'd received an email with another clip. I felt sick to my stomach. Sarah was actually going through with her threats. I tried to explain the situation to my family, but it was embarrassing and awkward. They were supportive, but I could tell they were uncomfortable. I felt ashamed, even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. Things escalated quickly after that. My boss called me into his office, looking grim. Someone had sent an anonymous email to the company with more footage. He said it was affecting the company's image and that we needed to discuss my future. I left work that day, feeling like my world was crumbling. I couldn't believe how quickly everything was falling apart. I decided to go to the police, hoping they could help. The officer I spoke to was sympathetic, but not very helpful. He said it was a tricky situation, especially since Sarah was being careful not to leave any direct evidence. Without proof that she was behind the emails, there wasn't much they could do. I felt completely helpless. Sarah was systematically destroying my life, and I couldn't stop her. I was constantly on edge, wondering who would receive the next video and what it would contain. Emily tried to be supportive, but I could tell the situation was taking a toll on our relationship. She said she trusted me, but the constant stress and embarrassment were hard to deal with. I wouldn't have blamed her if she decided to leave. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and watch my life fall apart. I started gathering every bit of evidence I could find. Old emails, text messages, anything that might prove Sarah was behind this. I also reached out to some tech-savvy friends for help. They showed me how to track the IP addresses of the emails and set up some digital traps to catch Sarah in the act. It was like being in a real-life thriller, but not in a fun way. Every day was a struggle. I had trouble sleeping, always worrying about what would happen next. My work suffered, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder. Weeks went by, and the emails kept coming. But slowly, I started to build a case. I managed to trace some of the emails back to Sarah's home network. It wasn't concrete proof, but it was a start. Then, finally, a breakthrough. Sarah slipped up. She sent an email from her personal account instead of the anonymous one she'd been using. It wasn't much, but it was the link I needed. I took everything I had gathered to the police. This time, they listened. They said they had enough to start an investigation. I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. The investigation moved slowly, but it was progress. Sarah was brought in for questioning. I don't know what was said, but the emails stopped after that. It's been a few weeks now, and things are starting to calm down. My boss has been understanding, and my job is secure for now. My family is supportive, although things are still a bit awkward. Emily and I are working through it all together. It started with little things. I'd put my keys on the counter but later find them on the coffee table. My favorite mug would be in a different cabinet. At first, I brushed it off as forgetfulness. Stress from the breakup, I thought. John and I had been together for 3 years. He was charming, successful, and everyone loved him. But behind closed doors, he was controlling and manipulative. When I finally gathered the courage to end things, he didn't take it well. He begged, pleaded, and then got angry. I stood my ground, and he eventually left. Or so I thought. A week after the breakup, I noticed my email settings had changed. Some emails were marked as read when I hadn't opened them. I changed my password, thinking it was a glitch. But it happened again. Then my friends started acting weird. Sarah asked why I'd canceled our lunch plans. I hadn't. Mark seemed upset about a rude message I supposedly sent. I never wrote it. One by one, my friends became distant. I started doubting myself. Was I forgetting things? Sending messages in my sleep? I'd wake up to find dirty dishes in the sink that I didn't remember using. My clothes would be slightly out of place in the closet. Work became difficult. I'd miss deadlines I swore I'd written down. My boss pulled me aside, concerned about my performance. I couldn't explain what was happening without sounding crazy. I saw John around town more often. He'd wave, ask how I was doing. Always polite, always concerned. "You don't look well," he'd say. "Are you sure you're okay on your own?" I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I did. But even that betrayed me. I'd find entries I didn't remember writing, describing events that never happened. Was I losing my mind? My family got involved. Mom called, worried about my erratic behavior. Dad suggested I see a therapist. My sister came to visit, her eyes full of concern as she looked around my messy apartment. I felt like I was drowning. Everything I knew about myself seemed to be slipping away. I couldn't trust my own memories anymore. The world felt foggy, unreal. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to clean. As I moved the couch to vacuum behind it, something caught my eye. A small, blinking light. I reached for it, my heart pounding. It was a tiny camera. Suddenly everything clicked. The moved objects, the accessed emails, the false messages. John had been watching me, manipulating my life from the shadows. I searched the apartment, finding more cameras and even a hidden microphone. Rage and relief flooded through me. I wasn't crazy. It was all John. But how could I prove it? Who would believe me? I'd spent months acting unstable. John had everyone wrapped around his finger. I needed a plan. I left the cameras in place but started feeding them false information. I pretended to talk to myself, describing things that never happened. I wrote fake journal entries where John could see them. Meanwhile, I gathered evidence. I traced the source of the fake emails. I asked friends for screenshots of the messages I had sent. I set up my own hidden camera to catch John entering my apartment. It took weeks, but I built a case. I took everything to the police. They were skeptical at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. John was arrested, and the truth came out. My friends and family were shocked and apologetic. I understood their disbelief. John had fooled everyone. Rebuilding those relationships took time, but it was worth it. The hardest part was rebuilding trust in myself. For months, I doubted my own mind. Therapy helped, but it was a long journey. Looking back, I can see how John almost won. He used my trust against me, twisted my reality. But in the end, he underestimated me. I fought back. I reclaimed my life. Now, I'm sharing my story to help others. Gaslighting is real and devastating. But you're not crazy. Trust yourself. Fight back. You're stronger than you know.